She was hired as a surrogate for a billionaire CEO until the test changed everything. I'm asking you to give away my child, my own biological child, the child I carried, the child I can feel moving inside me right now. Bryn's voice cracked as she stood in the marble-floored office, her hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. Callum Winters, the billionaire CEO who had hired her as a surrogate, stared back at her with unreadable eyes. This changes nothing, Bryn. The contract clearly states. The contract said donor egg. She stepped closer, tears streaming down her face. This is my egg, Callum, my baby. You can't expect me to just hand her over like she's some kind of transaction. He turned away, jaw clenched, hands balling into fists at his sides. What exactly do you want from me? His voice was low, dangerous, breaking at the edges. I want you to see me, to see her, to acknowledge that this stopped being business the moment we found out the truth. The silence between them stretched like a chasm, filled with everything neither of them knew how to say. But to understand how Bryn Lennox and Callum Winters arrived at this impossible moment, we need to go back. Back to where desperation meets opportunity, where need collides with want, and where two strangers made a choice that would unravel both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Have you ever been so desperate that you'd do anything to save someone you love? Have you ever stood at a crossroads where every path forward required you to sacrifice a piece of yourself? If you've ever felt trapped between what you need and what's right, drop a comment saying I'm here, and hit subscribe, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about love, sacrifice, and the choices we make when we're desperate. 6 months earlier, Bryn Lennox sat cross-legged on the floor of her cramped studio apartment, surrounded by a sea of medical bills. Each envelope was a reminder of her failing fight against an enemy she couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't defeat with her own 2 hands. Leukemia. The word had stolen the color from her world the day her younger brother Knox was diagnosed. The numbers blurred together as exhaustion pulled at her consciousness. 43,000, 62,000, 18,000. The sum total was a mountain she couldn't climb, a debt that grew faster than she could earn, faster than she could breathe. Her phone buzzed against the hardwood floor. She picked it up with clay-stained fingers, remnants of her last commission, a custom vase set that had paid exactly 1/8 of one hospital bill. The text was from Knox. Just 3 words that broke her heart all over again. How you doing, sis? He was the one dying, and he was checking on her. Bryn typed back quickly, forcing lightness into words that felt like lies. All good. Focus on getting better. Love you. She set the phone down and let her head fall back against the wall. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic below. This place had been her sanctuary once, when she'd first moved in 3 years ago, fresh from art school, full of dreams about making it as a ceramicist. She'd imagined this space filled with her creations, imagined gallery showings, imagined a life where art sustained her. Instead, the shelves held half-finished pieces she didn't have time to complete. The kiln in the corner had been silent for weeks. The gallery that had carried her work had closed last month, another casualty of an economy that didn't value beauty when people were just trying to survive. Bryn stood and walked to her laptop, sitting open on the kitchen counter that doubled as her workspace, dining table, and catch-all for the debris of her disintegrating life. She'd been searching for second jobs, third jobs, anything that paid. Waitressing, retail, overnight stocking. She'd applied to 27 positions in the past week and heard back from exactly none. Her email inbox showed one new message. Probably another rejection, she thought, but clicked anyway. The subject line made her pause. Exclusive surrogacy opportunity. Compensation up to $200,000. Bryn's finger hovered over the delete button. She'd seen ads like this before, always vaguely predatory, probably a scam. But something made her open it instead. The email was professionally formatted, sent from a medical agency called Genesis Path Surrogacy Services. The message was brief, clinical, impersonal. We are seeking a healthy woman aged 25 to 35 to serve as gestational carrier for an exclusive client. This is a unique opportunity with compensation of $200,000 upon successful delivery. Candidates must be willing to sign comprehensive NDA. Interested parties should respond immediately as this position will be filled quickly. $200,000. Bryn read the number 3 times, trying to make it feel real. That was more money than she'd made in the past 3 years combined. That was Knox's treatment. That was his bone marrow transplant. That was his life. But it also meant carrying a child, giving birth. 2 things she'd sworn she would never do. Her mother had died giving birth to Bryn. hemorrhaged out on a delivery table while doctors fought and failed to save her. Bryn had grown up knowing she was the reason her mother didn't exist, the reason her father had raised her and Knox alone, the reason there was always a shadow of sadness in family photographs. She'd promised herself she would never put herself in that position, never risk leaving someone the way her mother had left her. But Knox was dying. Bryn's hand shook as she clicked reply and began to type. "My name is Bryn Lennox. I'm interested in learning more about this opportunity." She hit send before she could change her mind. The response came in less than 10 minutes. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. An address in the most expensive part of the city. Bryn didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. Imagining her mother's last moments. Imagining Knox's funeral. Imagining carrying a stranger's child and handing it away like a package, like something that hadn't lived inside her body for 9 months. But she also imagined Knox healthy. Imagined him graduating high school, going to college, living the life that leukemia was trying to steal from him. When morning came, Bryn stood in front of her closet trying to decide what someone wears to sell their womb. She settled on simple black pants and a white blouse, the outfit she used to wear to gallery meetings back when she had a career. The address led her to a building that was all glass and steel, gleaming in the afternoon sun like something from a future she'd never be part of. The lobby had marble floors, abstract art on the walls, and a security desk where she had to sign in and receive a visitor's badge. Genesis Path Surrogacy Services occupied the entire 15th floor. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical office. Soft lighting, leather furniture, a water feature trickling peacefully in the corner. A receptionist with perfect makeup and a practiced smile greeted her. "Bryn Lennox?" "Yes, please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Bryn sat, hands folded in her lap, trying not to touch anything that probably cost more than her monthly rent. There were magazines on the table, the kind with thick glossy pages showcasing lives she couldn't fathom. She didn't pick them up. 15 minutes passed. 30. Just when Bryn was starting to wonder if this was some kind of test, a woman in a crisp gray suit appeared. "Miss Lennox? I'm Director Harlow. Thank you for coming. If you'll follow me." They walked down a hallway lined with closed doors, finally entering a conference room that was all windows on one side, offering a view of the city that made Bryn's breath catch. She'd never been this high up, never seen her home from this perspective. "Please, sit." Bryn sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. Director Harlow opened a folder, scanning documents with efficient eyes. "I'll be direct, Miss Lennox. We've had over 300 applicants for this position. We selected you for an interview based on your medical history, genetic screening from your last donation, and background check." Bryn's eyebrows rose. "I never applied to donate anything. Your information was in a database from when you participated in that genetic research study 3 years ago. You signed a release allowing your anonymous data to be used for medical matching purposes." Bryn vaguely remembered something like that. She'd been paid $200 to provide DNA and medical history. She'd needed the money then too. "Our client is very specific about what he's looking for," Director Harlow continued. "He requires a carrier with no genetic predisposition to major diseases, high intelligence markers, and a demonstrated ability to commit to long-term projects despite adversity. Your history as an artist who put herself through school while caring for an ill family member fits his requirements." "Who is he?" "I can't disclose that unless you agree to move forward and sign our NDA. What I can tell you is that he's a prominent businessman who's unable to pursue traditional surrogacy options due to personal circumstances." Bryn's mind raced with questions, but one rose above the others. "Why so much money? 200,000 seems excessive for surrogacy." Director Harlow's expression didn't change. "Our client values privacy and commitment. The compensation reflects both the medical service you'd be providing and the discretion you'd be required to maintain. This would be a closed surrogacy. No contact after birth, complete separation." Something cold settled in Bryn's stomach. "You want me to carry a baby for 9 months and then never see it again? That is the nature of gestational surrogacy, yes. Using my eggs? No." Director Harlow pulled out another document. "Our client will be using a donor egg from our database, combined with his genetic material. You would simply be the carrier. Simply." The word hung in the air, minimizing something that felt anything but simple. "I need to be clear about something," Bryn said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "My mother died in childbirth. I have significant anxiety about pregnancy and delivery. Director Harlow made a note. We would, of course, provide the absolute best medical care available. Our client has already arranged for the top obstetric team in the country to be at your disposal. You'd be monitored closely throughout the entire process. And if something goes wrong, you'd be covered by a comprehensive insurance policy. Additionally, our contract includes provisions for your family in the event of any complications. How generous, Bryn thought bitterly. A price tag on her potential death. But $200,000 was also a price tag on Knox's life. I need time to think about this. Director Harlow nodded, sliding a folder across the table. This contains all the relevant information, medical protocols, contract overview, and consent forms. However, I should mention that we have 2 other candidates being interviewed this week. Our client wants this arranged quickly. If you're interested, I need to know by tomorrow morning. Bryn took the folder with numb fingers. Tomorrow morning. That night, Bryn sat in the hospital with Knox. He was sleeping, his 17-year-old face gaunt and pale against the pillow, dark circles under his eyes making him look so much older than he was. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, counting his heartbeats, measuring his time. She held the folder in her lap, unopened. A nurse came in to check his vitals, smiled sadly at Bryn. You're here late again. Can't seem to stay away, Bryn replied, the joke falling flat. When the nurse left, Bryn finally opened the folder. The contract was 47 pages of legal language that made her head hurt, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Gestational carrier agrees to relinquish all parental rights. No contact initiated by carrier post-delivery. Carrier agrees to follow all medical protocols as directed by client's physicians. Compensation to be paid in full upon successful live birth. Successful live birth. As opposed to what? Unsuccessful? Was there a fee reduction if the baby died? If she died? Bryn forced herself to keep reading. The medical information was extensive. The IVF process. Hormone treatments. Monitoring schedules. Delivery protocols. It was clinical, detached, reducing pregnancy to a series of procedures and milestones. But it was the financial breakdown that made her hands shake. $50,000 upon confirmation of pregnancy. $50,000 at 20 weeks. $100,000 upon delivery. She pulled out her phone and looked at the running total of Knox's medical debt. It had reached $273,000. Insurance covered some, but the experimental treatments he needed, the ones that might actually save his life, those weren't covered. The bone marrow transplant alone was $350,000. $200,000 wouldn't cover everything, but it would cover enough to get him the transplant. Enough to give him a real chance. Bryn looked at her brother's sleeping face. I'm sorry, she whispered, though she didn't know if she was apologizing to him, to herself, or to the hypothetical child she was about to agree to carry and abandon. She pulled out her phone and typed an email to Director Harlow. I'm in. What's next? The response came before she even left the hospital. Be at our office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring identification and be prepared to sign contracts. Welcome aboard, Miss Lennox. Bryn spent the rest of the night with Knox, memorizing his face, reminding herself why she was about to do the unthinkable. The next morning, Bryn arrived at Genesis Path at 8:55 a.m. Director Harlow was waiting with a team of lawyers and medical professionals. The next 3 hours were a blur of signatures, initialed pages, medical examinations, and blood draws. By noon, she'd signed away her autonomy for the next 9 months and received confirmation that $50,000 would be deposited into her account upon successful embryo implantation. Now, Director Harlow said, checking her watch, there's one more step. Our client would like to meet you. Bryn's stomach dropped. I thought this was anonymous. He knows who you are. You just don't know who he is. Not yet. He wants to meet the woman who'll be carrying his child. It's non-negotiable, I'm afraid. Bryn's mouth went dry. Vain? Director Harlow smiled. Right now. He's in the next room. Bryn's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed Director Harlow down another hallway. They stopped outside a door marked Private Conference Room. A few things before you go in, Director Harlow said quietly. Mr. Winters is a very private man. He's not comfortable with emotional displays. Keep the conversation professional. Don't ask too many personal questions. And remember, you've already signed the contract. This meeting is a courtesy, not a negotiation, Mr. Winters. So now she had a name. Director Harlow opened the door and gestured for Bryn to enter. The room was smaller than the previous conference room, more intimate, with a round table and only 4 chairs. Standing at the window, looking out at the city, was a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He turned as she entered, and Bryn's first thought was that he looked exhausted. Her second thought was that he was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes assessed her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. "Miss Lennox." His voice was deep, controlled, revealing nothing. "Please sit." Bryn sat. Director Harlow quietly exited, closing the door behind her. For a long moment, Callum Winters simply looked at her, not in a way that felt invasive but analytical, like he was trying to solve an equation. "Thank you for agreeing to this arrangement," he finally said, sitting across from her. "Your welcome felt wrong. This is my job now felt worse." Bryn settled on, "I'm committed to following through professionally." Something flickered across his face. Amusement? Approval? It was gone too quickly to identify. "I've read your file. You're a ceramicist." "Was," Bryn corrected before she could stop herself. "I was a ceramicist. Right now, I'm mostly just trying to keep my head above water." His eyes sharpened with interest. "Your work was featured in the Ashland Gallery exhibition 2 years ago, the series on impermanence and memory." Bryn blinked in surprise. "You know my work?" "I attended that exhibition. I purchased one of your pieces, actually. A bowl with gold veining through the cracks." "That was you?" She'd sold that piece for $8,000, the most she'd ever gotten for a single work. The sale had kept her afloat for 4 months. She'd never known who bought it, had imagined some art collector or interior designer. Callum Winters nodded. "Kintsugi technique, if I remember correctly. The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. You remember correctly. I found the philosophy compelling. The idea that breakage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to hide. That the piece becomes more valuable for having been broken." Bryn didn't know what to say. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected to have with the billionaire who'd hired her womb. "Why did you choose surrogacy?" she asked, then immediately regretted it when his expression shuttered closed. "That's personal. So is carrying your child." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. They stared at each other across the table, and Bryn braced for anger. Instead, Callum leaned back in his chair, studying her again. "Fair point." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "My late wife died attempting to get pregnant. She had a genetic condition that made pregnancy extremely high risk. We tried once anyway. She didn't survive the miscarriage. Oh God, I'm so sorry. That was 3 years ago. I've spent the time since building my company trying to forget. But recently I've realized that I want a legacy beyond neurosynth. I want a child. But I can't risk another woman's life in traditional conception. Hence, surrogacy with a donor egg." Bryn absorbed this information, understanding clicking into place. "You must have loved her very much." His jaw tightened. "I did." The past tense felt important, final. "What about you?" Callum asked. "Why agree to this? The file mentions a brother with medical needs, but that's not the whole story, is it?" Bryn hesitated. How much truth did she owe this stranger? "My brother Knox has leukemia. He needs a bone marrow transplant we can't afford. I've tried everything else. This was the only option left that would generate enough money fast enough. So we're both desperate," Callum observed. "Just in different ways, I suppose we are." He reached across the table, not to touch her but to slide a business card in her direction. "My private number. If you have any concerns during the pregnancy, any issues at all, you call me directly. Not the agency, me." Bryn picked up the card, surprised by the gesture. "I'll be involved," he continued. "Not invasively, but I want updates. I want to know how you're doing, how the pregnancy is progressing. Is that acceptable?" The contract said this was supposed to be hands-off. The contract ensures your privacy and sets boundaries. But within those boundaries, I'd like us to be able to communicate. This is my child you'll be carrying. I'd prefer not to be completely shut out of the process. There was something vulnerable in the admission, something that softened the hard edges of this transaction. "Okay," Bryn agreed. "Updates. Communication. Within boundaries." Callum nodded, satisfied. "One more thing." "Yes, there's clay under your fingernails." Bryn flushed, suddenly self-conscious. "I was working this morning, trying to finish a commission." "Don't stop," he said firmly. "Don't give up your art for this. Whatever you need, studio space, materials, time, it's yours. I'll have it arranged. That's not necessary." His eyes met hers, intense and certain. "Yes, it is. You're sacrificing enough. I won't have you sacrifice the things that make you who you are." Bryn felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built starting to crack. "Thank you." Callum stood, signaling the end of the meeting. He extended his hand, and Bryn rose to shake it. His grip was firm, warm, and lasted a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "I'll see you at the first appointment," he said. "Director Harlow has the schedule." Bryn nodded, not trusting her voice. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Miss Lennox?" She looked back. "I know this isn't a conventional arrangement, but I want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing, truly." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "I hope I can give you what you're looking for," she said quietly. Something unreadable crossed his face. "So do I." Bryn left the building in a daze, Callum Winters' business card burning a hole in her pocket, the memory of his storm-gray eyes following her all the way home. She didn't know it yet, but that meeting had changed everything. The careful boundaries they'd tried to establish were already beginning to blur. And the child they'd agreed to create together would unravel them both in ways neither could have possibly imagined. The IVF process began 2 weeks later. Bryn sat in a medical clinic that looked more like a spa, receiving hormone injections that would prepare her body to receive an embryo that wasn't genetically hers. The doctor explained each step with clinical detachment, while a nurse held her hand through the more painful procedures. It was surreal, this medicalization of something that was supposed to be natural, intimate. But then again, nothing about this arrangement was natural. Callum attended the embryo transfer appointment. Bryn hadn't expected him to be there, but when she arrived at the clinic, there he was in the waiting room, looking uncomfortably out of place among the pastel colors and soft music. Their eyes met across the room. He stood, walked over. "I hope you don't mind," he said quietly. "I wanted to be here for this part." "It's your child," Bryn replied. "You have every right." The procedure itself was quick, clinical, and uncomfortable. Bryn lay on an examination table while doctors transferred the fertilized embryo into her uterus via a thin catheter. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes. Callum waited outside, but when it was over and Bryn was resting in a recovery room, the nurse asked if she wanted him to come in. Bryn surprised herself by saying yes. He entered cautiously, as if afraid of intruding. "How are you feeling?" "Like I just had a very weird medical procedure, which is accurate." She tried to smile. He sat in the chair beside the bed, keeping a respectful distance. "They said it will take about 10 days to know if it worked." "I know." Bryn turned her head to look at him. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted, "which is irrational. Everything that can be controlled has been controlled. We have the best doctors, the best facility, the best possible circumstances, but you can't control whether it works." "No." He met her eyes. "I can't control that." They sat in silence for a moment, sharing the weight of waiting. Then Callum did something unexpected. He pulled a book from his bag and set it on the rolling table beside her bed. Bryn picked it up. "Japanese Ceramics, a Historical Survey. You mentioned Raku pottery in your interview with Director Harlow. I thought you might enjoy this." Bryn opened the book, finding pages filled with stunning photographs of pottery that made her heart ache with longing for her own studio. "This is beautiful." "Thank you." "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was a gesture of thoughtfulness from a man who was supposed to be a detached client, nothing more. Bryn looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit and controlled demeanor to something raw underneath. Grief, maybe. Loneliness, definitely. "Tell me about your company," she said, surprising them both. "Neurosynth. What do you actually do?" Callum's expression shifted, the vulnerability disappearing behind professional confidence. "We develop quantum computing systems for medical applications. Specifically, we're working on computers that can model protein folding at a molecular level to predict disease progression and identify treatment options." Bryn blinked. I understood about half of those words. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "We make really fast computers that help doctors figure out how to cure diseases." "That I understand," she smiled back. "Noble work. It's personal work. If we'd had this technology 3 years ago, maybe Talia would have survived." "Talia?" "His late wife. Is that why you started the company?" "No. I started it because I'm good with numbers and systems. But after Talia died, the work became about something more than profit." He paused, then added quietly, "Though I've made a substantial profit anyway. Money and meaning aren't mutually exclusive." "No, but meaning is harder to measure." They talked for another 20 minutes before the nurse came to discharge Bryn with instructions to rest for the next 48 hours. Callum stood to leave. "I'll have a car bring you home. I can take the bus. Please, let me do this." Bryn was too exhausted to argue. As promised, a sleek black car was waiting at the clinic entrance. The driver held the door open for her, and Bryn slid into leather seats that were more comfortable than her bed. Halfway home, her phone buzzed with a text from Callum. "Thank you for letting me be there today. Rest well." She typed back, "Thank you for the book." Then, on impulse, added, "And for caring enough to show up." His response came quickly. "I'll always show up." Bryn didn't know why those 3 words made her throat tight, why they felt like a promise that extended beyond the contractual obligation between them. She looked out the window at the city passing by, one hand unconsciously resting on her flat stomach, and wondered what she'd really agreed to when she signed those papers. 10 days later, Bryn sat in her bathroom at 6 in the morning, hands shaking as she unwrapped a pregnancy test. The clinic had scheduled a blood test for later that day, but she couldn't wait. She needed to know now, in the privacy of her own space, before doctors and contracts and Callum Winters's storm-gray eyes. She followed the instructions, then set the test on the edge of the sink and forced herself to walk away. 3 minutes. The box said 3 minutes. She paced her tiny apartment, counting seconds, trying not to hope too hard. When she finally looked, there were 2 pink lines. Positive. Bryn's legs gave out. She sat on the bathroom floor, test clutched in her hand, and felt the reality crash over her. There was a life growing inside her, a cluster of cells that would become a person she would carry and birth and then give away. Her phone rang. "Callum," she answered, voice shaky. "Hello?" "I know we're not supposed to get the results until this afternoon, but I had to call. I haven't slept. I just needed to hear your voice." "It's positive," Bryn said. "I just took a home test." "It's positive, Callum." Silence on the other end. Then, in a voice rough with emotion, "Are you certain?" 2 lines. Very clear. She heard him exhale, long and slow. Okay. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself this was real. "We'll confirm with the blood test, but if the home test is positive, it's usually accurate. Usually. I'll meet you at the clinic." "What time is your appointment?" 2 p.m. "I'll be there." He hung up, and Bryn sat on the bathroom floor a while longer, processing the magnitude of what had just become real. She was pregnant with Callum Winters's child. The blood test confirmed it. Pregnant, 4 weeks, hormone levels excellent. Callum was waiting when Bryn emerged from the exam room. He stood as she approached, searching her face. "Congratulations," she said, managing a smile. "You're going to be a father." For just a moment, his carefully constructed composure cracked. She saw joy flash across his face, quickly followed by terror, then settling into something like cautious hope. "And you're," he started, then seemed unsure how to finish the sentence. "Pregnant," she supplied. "For the next 8.5 months anyway. How are you feeling?" "Really?" Bryn considered lying, but something about the genuine concern in his eyes made her honest. "Terrified, nauseous, completely overwhelmed. That makes 2 of us. Though I imagine my nausea is purely psychological." She laughed, surprising herself. "Come on," he said suddenly. "Let's get out of here." "Where?" "Anywhere but this clinic, unless you're too tired." Bryn should have been tired. She should have gone home to process this alone, to maintain the professional boundaries they'd agreed upon. Instead, she heard herself say, "I could use some fresh air." They ended up in a small park a few blocks from the clinic, walking slowly along paths lined with early spring flowers. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the park was mostly empty except for a few parents with young children. "I used to come here with Talia," Callum said quietly. "Before she got sick, we'd walk here on weekends. I'm sorry. We can go somewhere else." "No." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "I've been avoiding this place for 3 years. Maybe it's time to stop running from ghosts." Bryn didn't know what to say, so she just stood beside him, a silent presence. "She would have liked you," he said eventually. "Talia. She loved art, creativity, people who saw the world differently. You would have gotten along. Tell me about her." And so he did. They sat on a bench while Callum talked about the woman he'd loved and lost. How they'd met at a technology conference where she'd been presenting research on biomedical engineering. How she'd challenged him intellectually in ways no one else had. How she'd believed in his company before anyone else did. How her laugh could fill a room. Bryn listened, understanding that this was important, that Callum needed to acknowledge Talia's place in his life before he could move forward into this new chapter. When he finally fell silent, Bryn spoke gently. "Thank you for telling me about her. For trusting me with that." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I don't know why it's easy to talk to you. It shouldn't be. We barely know each other. Sometimes strangers are the safest people to talk to. No history, no expectations." "Is that what we are? Strangers?" Bryn considered the question. They were bound together by contract and biology, by a child growing in her womb that was his genetic legacy. But did that make them more than strangers? I don't know what we are, she admitted. Callum's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at it, frowned. I have a board meeting in an hour. I need to go. Of course. They stood, walking back toward the street where his car was waiting. Before he got in, he turned back to her. Bryn, I know this is unconventional. I know we're navigating territory neither of us has a map for. But I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here. The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. Thank you, Callum. He nodded, then hesitated, as if wanting to say more. Instead, he simply got into his car and drove away. Bryn watched until the car disappeared around a corner, then pulled out her phone and called Knox. He answered on the second ring, slightly breathless. Sis, hey. What's up? The first payment cleared. We can schedule your transplant. She heard him inhale sharply. Seriously? Seriously. I'm calling the hospital as soon as we hang up. Bryn, I don't know what you did, but thank you. God, thank you. Tears burned her eyes. You're worth it, Knox. You're worth everything. When she hung up, Bryn put her hand on her still flat stomach and whispered to the cluster of cells inside her. I'm doing this for him. I hope you understand. The baby, of course, couldn't answer. But somewhere in Bryn's heart, she hoped that someday, somehow, this choice would make sense. She just didn't know yet how complicated everything was about to become. Week 8 hit Bryn like a freight train. The morning sickness wasn't morning at all. It was all day, relentless, debilitating nausea that made even the thought of food unbearable. She spent 3 days barely able to lift her head from the pillow, surviving on crackers and ginger ale, missing a commission deadline she desperately needed. On the 4th day, Callum showed up at her apartment unannounced. Bryn answered the door in sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, hair unwashed, looking and feeling like death. His expression shifted from concern to alarm. When did you last eat? Yesterday, maybe. She swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe. Callum didn't ask permission. He simply stepped inside, took in the state of her apartment with one sweeping glance, and pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Bryn asked weakly. Calling my doctor. You need to be seen immediately. It's just morning sickness. It's normal. Nothing about how you look right now is normal. Within an hour, Bryn found herself in the back of Callum's car, being driven to a private medical clinic. She was too exhausted to protest, too sick to care about maintaining boundaries. The doctor diagnosed severe hyperemesis gravidarum, extreme morning sickness that required immediate intervention. They gave her IV fluids and anti-nausea medication, admitted her overnight for observation. Callum stayed. You don't have to be here, Bryn said from her hospital bed, finally feeling halfway human after the IV had worked its magic. I know. He was sitting in the chair by the window, laptop open but clearly not working. I want to be. Why? He looked up, meeting her eyes across the dimly lit room. Because you're doing something incredibly difficult for my benefit. The least I can do is make sure you survive it. Despite everything, Bryn smiled. Low bar. Yet apparently one I almost failed to clear. His jaw tightened. You should have called me when it got this bad. I didn't want to bother you. Bryn. He closed his laptop, leaned forward. Listen to me carefully. You are not bothering me. You're carrying my child. Your well-being is my priority. If something is wrong, I need to know. Understood? The intensity in his voice made something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nausea. Understood. Good. They lapsed into silence. Outside the window, the city glittered against the night sky. Can I ask you something? Bryn said quietly. Of course. Why did you wait 3 years after Talia died? Why wait so long to decide you wanted a child? Callum was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. Because for 3 years I convinced myself I didn't deserve happiness. That wanting anything beyond my work was selfish. Talia died trying to give me a family, and I survived. The guilt was paralyzing. What changed? He met her eyes. I woke up one morning and realized I'd built an empire but had no one to share it with. No legacy beyond quarterly earnings reports. Talia wouldn't have wanted that for me. She would have wanted me to live, not just exist. Bryn felt tears prick her eyes. I think she'd be proud of you for choosing to move forward. I hope so. He paused. What about you? What will you do after all this is over? The question hung heavy in the air. I don't know, Bryn admitted. I haven't let myself think that far ahead. Right now, I'm just trying to get through each day. Your art. You'll go back to it? If I can. The gallery scene is brutal. Most artists never make a sustainable living, then don't rely on galleries. Callum's business mind was clearly engaging. Sell direct. Build an online presence. You have talent, Bryn. Real talent. You just need better infrastructure. Easier said than done. What if I helped? She looked at him warily. How? I could connect you with people. Collectors, designers, architects who commission custom pieces. No strings attached. Just introductions. Why would you do that? Because I can, and because watching talented people struggle when I have the resources to help feels wrong. Bryn didn't know what to say. Every interaction with Callum Winters seemed to peel back another layer, revealing someone far more complex than the cold CEO she'd imagined. Thank you, she finally whispered. He nodded, then stood. You should sleep. Doctor's orders. What about you? I'll be here. Callum. I'm not leaving you alone in a hospital, Bryn. Not after what happened. So just accept that I'm staying and get some rest. Something warm and dangerous bloomed in her chest. This man who barely knew her was choosing to spend the night in an uncomfortable chair just to make sure she was okay. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, felt safe enough to sleep. When Bryn woke the next morning, Callum was gone. In his place was a note written in precise, controlled handwriting. Had to go to an emergency board meeting. Driver will take you home when you're discharged. Your apartment has been stocked with every anti-nausea remedy known to medicine. Call me if you need anything. And I mean anything. Callum. Bryn held the note, reading it 3 times, trying to ignore how much she liked the way he signed just his first name. True to his word, when she arrived home, her kitchen was transformed. Ginger tea, crackers, electrolyte drinks, special anti-nausea candies, everything organized and labeled. There was also a new air purifier because strong smells were a trigger, and a beautiful ceramic vase on her counter with fresh flowers. The card attached read simply, "For better days ahead." Bryn sat on her couch and cried, not from sadness or sickness, but from the overwhelming realization that she was starting to feel something for Callum Winters that went far beyond their contractual arrangement. And that terrified her more than anything. The next few weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Callum texted her every morning. Simple check-ins. How are you feeling today? Did you sleep? Have you eaten? At first, Bryn's responses were brief, clinical. Fine. Yes. Yes. But gradually they began to talk. Real conversations that stretched beyond pregnancy updates into territory that felt dangerously personal. He told her about a difficult investor meeting. She told him about finally finishing a commission. He sent her articles about art he thought she'd appreciate. She sent him funny memes about pregnancy symptoms that made him laugh, which he admitted was rare. One evening he called instead of texting. I'm outside your building, he said without preamble. I have food. Can I come up? Bryn looked around her apartment. It was messy but not disastrous. Okay. 5 minutes later, Callum appeared at her door with bags from an expensive restaurant. You didn't have to do this. I know, but I was nearby and I thought you might be tired of cooking. He was lying. His office was across town. He'd driven 40 minutes out of his way. But Bryn didn't call him on it. Instead, she stepped aside and let him in. They ate together at her small kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. He asked about her pottery technique. She asked about quantum computing and actually understood his explanation this time. Somewhere between the appetizer and dessert, Bryn realized she was having the best evening she'd had in months. When he finally stood to leave, they lingered at the door. Thank you for dinner, she said softly. Thank you for the company. He hesitated, then added, I like talking to you, Bryn, more than I probably should. Her breath caught. What does that mean? It means I'm starting to blur the lines I promised myself I'd keep clear. Me too, she admitted. They stood in her doorway, inches apart, the air between them charged with possibility. Callum reached out, almost touching her face, then dropped his hand. This is complicated. Very. We should be careful. We should. Neither of them moved. Finally, Callum stepped back, breaking the spell. Good night, Bryn. Good night, Callum. She closed the door and leaned against it, heart racing, knowing that something fundamental had shifted between them tonight. Week 12 arrived with a routine ultrasound that would change everything. Callum picked Bryn up personally, something he'd started doing for all her appointments. They drove to the clinic, making easy conversation, both excited to see the baby for the first time on screen. The technician started the ultrasound with professional efficiency, spreading gel on Bryn's barely showing belly, running the wand across her skin. Then her expression changed, subtle at first, a slight furrow of her brow, a pause that lasted just a beat too long. Is something wrong? Bryn asked, anxiety spiking. Let me just get the doctor, the technician said, her professional smile not reaching her eyes. Bryn's hand found Callum's, squeezing hard. He held on, his own tension evident in the set of his jaw. The doctor entered, took the wand, studied the screen with intense focus. "The baby's fine," she said immediately. Strong heartbeat, good development. Relief flooded through Bryn. "But there's something we need to discuss." The doctor turned to face them both. "I'm seeing some genetic markers that are unexpected based on the donor profile we were provided." "What kind of markers?" Callum asked, his voice tight. The doctor chose her words carefully. "Based on the genetic screening we do at this stage, this embryo appears to share genetic material with Miss Lennox." "That's impossible," Callum said flatly. "We used a donor egg. I understand that was the plan. But what I'm seeing suggests otherwise. I'd like to run a more comprehensive genetic test to confirm, but preliminarily, it appears this is biologically Miss Lennox's child." The room tilted. Bryn heard the words but couldn't process them. Her child. Her biological child. "How did this happen?" she whispered. The doctor looked grim. "I don't know. But I intend to find out. This is a serious breach of protocol." Callum stood abruptly, pulling out his phone. "I want a full investigation. Now. I want to know exactly how this happened and who's responsible." He stepped out of the room, voice rising as he made calls. Bryn lay on the examination table, gel still on her stomach, staring at the frozen image of the baby on the screen. Her baby. The doctor touched her shoulder gently. "I know this is a shock. Take your time processing. We'll get answers." But Bryn barely heard her. Her mind was reeling through the implications. This changed everything. The contract specified a donor egg. This baby was legally hers. She could walk away, keep her child, but Knox still needed treatment. The transplant was scheduled for next month. She'd already received the first payment, spent it on his care. Callum returned, face pale but composed. "The clinic is being investigated. They're pulling all records from the day of your egg retrieval and the fertilization process." "I never had an egg retrieval," Bryn said quietly. "What? They told me I was just the carrier. They were using donor eggs. I never gave my eggs." Realization dawned on both of them simultaneously. Somewhere, somehow, Bryn's eggs had been harvested and used without her knowledge or consent during one of the many procedures she'd undergone. "Oh God," Bryn breathed. "This is so much worse than a mix-up." Callum's hands clenched into fists. "Someone is going to pay for this. But right now I don't care about that." He knelt beside the examination table, his eyes searching hers. "Bryn, are you okay?" "I don't know." She felt tears sliding down her temples. "I don't know what I am. We'll figure this out." "How?" "Everything just changed, Callum. This is my baby. Mine. The contract. Forget the contract. You can't just forget a legal document. Watch me." His intensity was fierce. "Bryn, listen to me. Yes, this changes things. But we'll deal with it together. Whatever you decide, whatever you want, we'll figure it out." "What I want," she laughed bitterly. "I want my brother to live. I want to not be terrified of dying in childbirth. I want to not have fallen for you when this was supposed to be simple and clean and professional." The last part slipped out before she could stop it. Callum froze. "You've fallen for me?" Bryn closed her eyes, mortified. "Forget I said that." "No." He touched her face gently, making her look at him. "Because I've fallen for you too, and it scares the hell out of me." Her breath caught. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he continued. "You were supposed to carry my child and walk away. I was supposed to stay detached, professional. But Bryn, every conversation, every moment with you, I feel something I thought died with Talia. Callum, I don't know what this means. I don't know how to navigate this. But I know I don't want to lose you, either of you." The baby on the screen chose that moment to move, a flutter of motion that made them both look. "Our baby," Bryn whispered. "Not yours or mine. Ours." "Ours," Callum repeated, the words sounding like a revelation. They sat together in that examination room, hands intertwined, staring at the ultrasound image of the child they'd accidentally created together, and felt the weight of everything shifting beneath their feet. The investigation took 2 weeks. The results were damning. A lab technician, overworked and exhausted, had mislabeled samples. Bryn's eggs, harvested during what she'd been told was a routine medical screening, had been fertilized instead of the intended donor eggs. The clinic offered profuse apologies, immediate termination of the responsible employee, and legal settlements. But none of that changed the fundamental reality. Bryn was pregnant with her own biological child. She and Callum spent those 2 weeks in a strange limbo. They saw each other almost daily but didn't talk about the elephant in the room. What happened next? Finally, Callum invited her to his house. Not the guest house on his estate, but his actual home. Bryn had never been inside before. She'd imagined something cold, modern, sterile. Instead, it was warm, lived in, filled with books and art and pieces that clearly meant something to him. He led her to a sitting room that overlooked a garden. "We need to talk about the future," he said once they were settled. "I know. The lawyers say you have full legal rights to the baby. The contract is void because its fundamental premise was false. You can walk away with your child and I have no claim." Bryn's throat tightened. "Is that what you want?" "No, God, no." Callum ran a hand through his hair. "But this isn't about what I want. It's about what's right. You didn't sign up for this, Bryn. You agreed to be a surrogate, not a mother. What if I want to be both?" He looked at her sharply. "What?" "I've had 2 weeks to think about this. And yes, I'm terrified. Yes, this wasn't the plan. But Callum, I can feel her moving inside me. I talk to her at night. And the thought of walking away, of pretending she doesn't exist, it's killing me. Then don't walk away. But I still need the money for Knox. I'll give it to you. Free and clear. No strings. That's not fair to you." Callum moved to sit beside her, taking her hands. "Listen to me. I will pay for Knox's treatment regardless of what you decide about the baby. That's non-negotiable. Your brother's life doesn't get to be leverage in this decision." Tears spilled down Bryn's cheeks. "Why are you being so good to me?" "Because somewhere in the middle of this impossible situation, I fell in love with you. Completely. Irrevocably. And I don't know how to stop." Bryn's breath hitched. "I love you too. I've been trying not to. I've been telling myself it's just hormones or proximity or gratitude. But it's not. It's real." Callum cupped her face, wiping away tears with his thumbs. "So where does that leave us?" "I don't know." She laughed through her tears. "This is insane. We barely know each other. I know you're brave enough to sacrifice yourself for someone you love. I know you create beauty with your hands. I know you make me laugh when I haven't laughed in years. I know you talk to the baby when you think no one's listening." He smiled softly. "I know enough. What are you saying?" "I'm saying let's figure this out together. You, me, and our daughter." "Our daughter," Bryn repeated, testing the words. "If you'll have me, not as a client or a contract, as a partner, a father, maybe eventually something more." Bryn looked at this man who'd entered her life as a transaction and somehow become everything. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Callum leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, filled with months of restrained longing finally released. When they pulled apart, both were trembling. "This is crazy," Bryn murmured against his lips. "Completely insane," he agreed, kissing her again. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, feeling the baby move between them, and marveling at how beautifully complicated their lives had become. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Callum insisted Bryn move into the guest house on his estate. Not because of the contract, but because he wanted her close, wanted to be part of every moment of the pregnancy. Knox's transplant was scheduled and successfully completed. The surgery went smoothly, and he began the long road to recovery with Callum covering every expense without hesitation. Bryn and Callum navigated their new relationship with careful tenderness. They had dinner together every night, took walks through the estate gardens, attended every doctor's appointment as a couple, not a client and surrogate. He set up a complete pottery studio for her in one of the estate buildings. Professional equipment, perfect lighting, everything she could need. "You didn't have to do this," she said, overwhelmed. "I want you to have space to create, to be yourself, not just pregnant." She kissed him, still getting used to the freedom to do so. Their relationship deepened slowly, carefully. Both were wary of rushing, of mistaking intensity for intimacy. But night after night, conversation after conversation, they built something real. Callum talked about his childhood in foster care, bouncing between homes until he aged out of the system at 18. How he'd built his company from nothing because he had no safety net, no family to fall back on. Bryn talked about growing up without a mother, the burden of guilt she'd carried her whole life, her fear of repeating history. "You're not going to die in childbirth," Callum said fiercely one night when she confessed her deepest fear. "You can't know that. Then I'll make sure the best medical team in the world is there. I'll have backup plans for the backup plans. Whatever it takes, Bryn, you're both going to be fine." His certainty helped ease some of her terror. Week 20 arrived with another ultrasound and the opportunity to learn the baby's sex. They already knew from the earlier genetic testing, but this felt more real, more concrete. The technician smiled at them. "Definitely a girl. See right there?" Bryn squeezed Callum's hand, watching their daughter on the screen. She's beautiful, he whispered. She looks like a blob, Bryn teased. The most beautiful blob I've ever seen. After the appointment, they drove to a small cafe Bryn loved. Have you thought about names? Callum asked as they shared a piece of cake. Some. Bryn hesitated. I know you probably want to name her after Talia. Callum was quiet for a moment. I love Talia. Part of me will always love her. But this baby, she's not a replacement or a memorial. She's something entirely new. Our daughter deserves her own name, her own identity. What about something that honors both our journeys? Bryn suggested. Something about hope or new beginnings? They spent the next hour throwing out suggestions, laughing at some, seriously considering others. Finally, Bryn said, what about Quinn? It means wise, intelligent. Callum smiled. Quinn Winters, or Quinn Lennox, or Quinn Winters Lennox. Both of us. Bryn felt her heart swell. I like that. A name that belongs to both of us. Quinn it is then. They toasted with their coffee cups, celebrating their daughter's name and the family they were building from the ashes of their separate griefs. Week 24 brought an unexpected crisis. Bryn was in her studio, working on a custom piece for a client Callum had connected her with, when she felt a sharp pain low in her abdomen. She tried to ignore it. Probably just round ligament pain, normal pregnancy stuff, but it came again, stronger, and again. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called Callum. He answered immediately. Hey, I was just thinking about you. Something's wrong. Her voice cracked. Callum, something's wrong. I'm on my way. Stay on the phone with me. She heard him running, heard him shouting to someone, heard a car door slam. Talk to me, Bryn. What are you feeling? Pain, cramping. Oh God, what if I'm losing her? You're not losing her. Listen to my voice. Breathe with me. In and out. He kept her on the phone the entire drive, his calm voice the only thing keeping her from full panic. When he burst into the studio minutes later, Bryn was on the floor, doubled over. Callum scooped her up without hesitation, carrying her to his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Bryn clutched his hand, terrified, while he drove with the other, breaking every speed limit. At the hospital, they rushed her to obstetrics. Monitors were attached. Doctors examined her. Callum refused to leave her side, holding her hand so tightly his knuckles were white. Finally, a doctor came in with results. The baby is fine. Strong heartbeat, no distress. Bryn sobbed with relief. However, the doctor continued, we're seeing some concerning signs with your placenta positioning. It's low-lying, which can cause pain and bleeding. You're going to need to be on modified bed rest for the foreseeable future. What does that mean? Callum demanded. It means limiting physical activity. No lifting, minimal standing, rest as much as possible. We'll monitor closely. If the placenta doesn't move as the pregnancy progresses, we may need to deliver early via C-section. Bryn felt her old fear rising. C-section. Surgery. Her mother had died during an emergency C-section. Callum must have sensed her panic because he turned to her immediately. Hey, look at me. We knew this might be complicated, but we have the best doctors, the best care. You're going to be okay. You don't know that, she whispered. Then we fight like hell to make sure of it. Over the next few weeks, Callum proved just how seriously he took that promise. He worked from home, setting up his office in the guest house so he could be near Bryn. He hired a nurse to check on her daily. He researched placenta previa obsessively, consulting with every expert he could find. Bryn, forced into bed rest, struggled with the inactivity. I feel useless, she complained one afternoon as Callum brought her lunch. You're growing a human. That's literally the opposite of useless. You know what I mean. He sat on the edge of the bed. I do, and I'm sorry this is hard. But Bryn, your health and Quinn's health matter more than anything else. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Me too. Really? Terrified. Every day. But I'm also hopeful. Because I have you and I have Quinn and I have something worth fighting for. Bryn reached for his hand. When did you become such a romantic? The moment you walked into that conference room with clay under your fingernails and challenged me about carrying my child. She smiled despite her fear. That feels like a lifetime ago. It was. We're completely different people now. Better people? Callum leaned down to kiss her forehead. Definitely better. The weeks crawled by. Bryn's condition remained stable but didn't improve. The placenta stayed stubbornly low. At 32 weeks, the doctors made a decision. They needed to plan for an early delivery. We'd like to schedule a C-section for week 37, the obstetrician explained. That gives Quinn enough time to develop while minimizing risk to you both. Bryn nodded numbly, terror coursing through her. That night, unable to sleep, she sat in the dark writing letters. One to Quinn, one to Knox, one to Callum, just in case. She'd learned from her mother's death that tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. She needed her daughter to know she was loved. She needed Knox to know he'd saved her as much as she'd saved him. She needed Callum to know he'd given her more happiness in 6 months than she'd imagined possible in a lifetime. She was sealing the envelopes when Callum appeared in the doorway. Can't sleep either? She quickly tried to hide the letters, but he saw them. Bryn. His voice was strained. What are you doing? Ben practical. He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the letters from her hands. No. He ripped them in half, then in half again. You're going to be here to tell Quinn everything yourself. You're going to watch Knox graduate college. You're going to grow old with me and complain about my terrible habits. Callum, promise me. He gripped her shoulders gently. Promise me you'll fight, that you won't give up. I'm scared, so am I, but we fight anyway, together. Bryn threw her arms around him, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Together, she whispered. Week 36 arrived unexpectedly early. Bryn woke at 3 a.m. to intense cramping and wetness between her legs. Callum. Her voice was tight with panic. I think my water just broke. He was up instantly, phone in hand, already calling the hospital. They made it to the hospital in record time. Bryn was wheeled directly to a delivery room. Monitors attached, medical team assembling. The baby's heart rate is dropping, a nurse called out. We need to deliver now, the doctor decided. Prep for emergency C-section. Everything happened fast. Too fast. Bryn was being prepped, signing consent forms she couldn't read through her tears. Callum was beside her, in surgical scrubs, gripping her hand. I can't do this, she sobbed. I can't. I'm going to die just like my mother. Look at me. His face was inches from hers, his eyes fierce and certain. You are not your mother. This is not her story. You are strong and stubborn, and you're going to fight like hell to meet our daughter. Do you hear me? I'm scared. I know. But I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. They wheeled her into the operating room. Bright lights, cold air, medical equipment everywhere. Callum sat by her head, holding her hand, talking to her in a steady stream of reassurance while they worked behind the surgical drape. You're doing amazing. Almost there. I love you so much. Quinn's going to be here soon. Bryn focused on his voice, on his gray eyes locked with hers, on the pressure she could feel but not the pain thanks to the anesthesia. Then she heard it. A cry. High-pitched, furious at being born. She's here, the doctor announced. You have a daughter. Bryn's tears came fast and hard. Is she okay? She's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that clearly work. They brought Quinn over, a tiny squirming bundle wrapped in a blanket. Bryn couldn't hold her yet, arms restrained by the surgery, but they placed her on Bryn's chest for a moment. Hi, baby girl, Bryn whispered. I'm your mama. I'm here. Callum's hand covered both of them, his own tears falling freely. She's beautiful, he said, voice breaking. Just like her mother. Quinn had Bryn's nose, Callum's eyes, and a full head of dark hair. We need to finish the surgery, the doctor said gently, and Quinn was taken to be checked while they closed Bryn up. The next hour was a blur. Bryn was moved to recovery. Quinn was brought back, declared healthy despite being a month early. Callum stayed between them, one hand on Bryn, one on Quinn's tiny bassinet. You did it, he said softly. You're both here. You're both okay. Bryn reached for his hand. We did it. He leaned down to kiss her, gentle and reverent. I love you, Bryn Lennox. I love you too, Callum Winters. Quinn chose that moment to make a small sound, and they both looked at her in wonder. Their daughter. Their miracle. The child born from a contract that became so much more. Knox visited the next day, finally strong enough after his transplant to leave the hospital himself. He stood at the doorway of Bryn's hospital room, taking in the scene. His sister in bed, exhausted but radiant. The billionaire CEO holding a newborn with surprising competence. The family that had somehow formed from chaos. So this is my niece, Knox said, approaching carefully. This is Quinn, Bryn confirmed. Want to hold her? Knox's eyes widened. I don't know how. I'll teach you, Callum said, and carefully transferred the baby to the teenager's arms. Knox stared down at Quinn with absolute wonder. She's so small. She's perfect, Bryn corrected. Thank you, Knox said suddenly, looking up at his sister with tears in his eyes. I know what you sacrificed for me. I know what this cost you. You're worth it, Bryn said firmly. You'll always be worth it, but you found something too, didn't you? He looked between Bryn and Callum. Something you weren't looking for. Yeah, Bryn admitted. I really did. The next few days in the hospital were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Learning to breastfeed. figuring out diaper changes, taking turns sleeping while Quinn slept. Callum was hands-on in a way that surprised the nurses. This wasn't a man who'd hired help to handle the difficult parts. He was there for every midnight feeding, every diaper change, every moment. On their last night in the hospital, after Quinn had finally fallen asleep in her bassinet, Callum pulled a small box from his pocket. Bryn's heart stopped. Is that what I think it is? I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other for 7 months. I know this whole thing started as a business arrangement. But Bryn, I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. He opened the box to reveal a simple, stunning ring. This isn't about the baby or obligation or any of that. This is about the fact that you're the bravest, most talented, most incredible woman I've ever known. And I don't want to waste another day not being your husband. Bryn's hands flew to her mouth. Will you marry me? She nodded, unable to speak through happy tears. Yes, God, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her deeply. Quinn made a small noise, and they broke apart laughing. Good timing, kid, Callum said to his daughter. They brought Bryn and Quinn home to the estate 3 days later. The guest house had been transformed. A nursery had appeared, fully stocked with everything a baby could need. Bryn's pottery studio remained untouched, waiting for when she was ready to return to it. But it was the main house that took Bryn's breath away. Callum led her inside, Quinn in her arms. I want you here, he said simply, not in the guest house. Airy with me. This is your home now, both of you. Bryn looked around at the space that had seemed so intimidating months ago. Now it just felt like a place waiting to be filled with life. Okay, she said. Let's make it ours. The first few weeks of parenthood were brutal and beautiful. Quinn was a good baby, but she was still a baby. She needed to eat every 2 hours. She cried for seemingly no reason. She refused to sleep unless someone was holding her. Bryn and Callum stumbled through it together, exhausted and overwhelmed and completely in love. I don't know what I'm doing, Callum admitted one night at 3 a.m., trying to calm a screaming Quinn. None of us do, Bryn said from the bed where she was trying to get 10 minutes of sleep. We're all just making it up as we go. That's not reassuring, but it's honest. Quinn finally settled, and Callum brought her over to Bryn for feeding. As their daughter nursed, Callum sat beside them, his arm around Bryn's shoulders. I never imagined this, he said quietly. A family. Real happiness. I thought that part of my life was over. I never imagined it at all, Bryn replied. I was so focused on surviving I forgot to think about living. And now? Now I can't imagine anything else. 6 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Bryn and Callum got married. It was a small ceremony in the estate gardens. Just Knox, fully in remission and healthy. A few close friends. The medical team who'd saved both Bryn and Quinn's lives. Quinn, in a tiny white dress, was held by Knox during the ceremony. Bryn walked down the makeshift aisle alone, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers, wearing a simple dress that she'd chosen because Callum had once mentioned he loved that color on her. Callum waited at the end, eyes locked on hers, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. They'd written their own vows. Callum went first. Bryn, when you walked into my life, I was living but not alive. You brought color back to a gray existence. You gave me hope when I'd forgotten what that felt like. You gave me our daughter, our family, our future. I vow to choose you every day for all my days. To support your art, your dreams, your stubborn independence. To be the partner you deserve and the father Quinn deserves. To love you through the easy days and the hard ones. To build a life with you brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. Bryn's turn. Callum, I came to you desperate and afraid, looking for a transaction. What I found was a partner, a love, a home. You caught me when I was falling, literally and figuratively. You showed me that strength isn't avoiding vulnerability but embracing it. You proved that family isn't just biology, it's choice. I vow to be your soft place to land, as you've been mine. To challenge you when you need it and support you always. To raise our daughter with all the love neither of us had growing up. To create beauty with you in all its forms. To love you fiercely, completely for as long as I live. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. They exchanged rings. Simple gold bands that matched. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said. You may kiss your bride. Callum cupped Bryn's face and kissed her deeply, and everyone cheered. Quinn chose that moment to start crying, and the ceremony dissolved into laughter. At the reception afterward, Knox gave a toast. When my sister told me she was becoming a surrogate, I thought she was crazy. When she told me she'd fallen for the billionaire CEO, I was sure she'd lost her mind. But watching them together, Watching the family they've built, I realize something. Sometimes the craziest decisions lead us exactly where we need to be. To Bryn and Callum, who proved that love doesn't follow a plan. It just shows up and changes everything. Glasses clinked. Bryn wiped away happy tears. Later, as the sun set and guests mingled, Bryn and Callum stole a moment alone. Quinn was asleep in Callum's arms, perfectly content. "Happy?" he asked. Bryn looked at her husband, her daughter, the life they'd built from the most unlikely beginning. Unbelievably happy. 2 years later, Bryn stood in her studio, hands covered in clay, shaping a large vase for a commission from a prominent museum. Her work had exploded in the past 2 years. She was now represented by 3 galleries, had a waiting list of clients, and her pieces commanded prices she'd once only dreamed of. But her favorite creations were still the small bowls she made for Quinn, each one imperfect and beautiful. "Mama," a small voice called from the doorway. Bryn looked up to see Quinn, now 2.5, standing with clay-covered hands from the small wheel Callum had installed just for her. "I made you," Quinn announced proudly, holding up what might have been a bowl or might have been a blob. "It's perfect," Bryn said seriously. "Let's fire it tomorrow." Quinn beamed and went back to her work. Callum appeared in the doorway, laptop in hand but clearly not working. "You're supposed to be in a meeting," Bryn teased. Couldn't concentrate. He set down his laptop and came over to kiss her, too distracted thinking about my beautiful wife. Smooth talker. It's true. He looked over at Quinn, who was now singing to herself as she smooshed clay. "You know what today is? Tuesday? 4 years since you walked into that agency office. Has it really been that long? 4 years since the best decision of my life." Bryn leaned into him, clay-covered hands and all. "Mine too." Quinn interrupted them, needing help with their project. They worked together, the 3 of them, hands moving in clay, creating something beautiful. That evening, after Quinn was in bed, Bryn and Callum sat in their living room. Bryn was sketching designs for new pieces. Callum was reading a book, though he kept getting distracted watching her work. "I have something for you," he said suddenly. Bryn looked up. "It's not my birthday." "I know." He pulled out a small package, clearly handmade. Inside was a ceramic bowl, clearly amateur work, imperfect and beautiful. "You made this?" Bryn asked, amazed. "I've been taking classes. Wanted to speak your language better." The bowl was small, uneven, but clearly made with care. Inside, carved into the clay, were words. "You are my vessel of hope." Bryn's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. It's terrible," Callum laughed. "But I meant it. I know. That's why it's perfect." Quinn called out from her room. A nightmare, maybe, and they both headed upstairs to comfort her. As Bryn tucked their daughter back into bed, singing softly, Callum watched from the doorway. His family, his home, his heart. All because of a contract that was supposed to be simple and turned out to be anything but. He wouldn't change a single moment. Not the complications, not the fear, not the chaos. Because all of it led here. To this moment, to this life, to love. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button if you believe in second chances and unexpected love stories. Second, subscribe to Cedar Drama and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you stories that will make you feel, think, and believe in the power of human connection. Third, comment below. Have you ever made a decision that seemed wrong at the time but led you exactly where you needed to be? Share your story. Our community loves hearing how life surprises us. This story isn't just about surrogacy or billionaires finding love. It's about several profound truths. 1. Desperate choices can lead to destined outcomes. Bryn made a decision from financial necessity that brought her to the love of her life. Sometimes our hardest moments are portals to our greatest blessings. 2. Healing isn't betrayal. Callum honoring Talia's memory while loving Bryn showed that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting the past. Our hearts have infinite capacity. 3. Family is built, not just born. Their family started with a contract and became real through daily choices to show up, to care, to try. 4. Vulnerability is the birthplace of connection. Both had to risk their protected hearts to find each other. The walls we build to protect us often imprison us instead. 5. Love transforms. Not in magical instant ways, but in quiet moments of choosing each other, in compromises, in showing up through fear. Bryn learned that asking for help isn't weakness. Callum learned that loving again isn't replacing what was lost. Together, they learned that the most beautiful creations come from unexpected collaborations. Your life might not involve surrogacy contracts or billion-dollar estates, but we all face moments where we must choose. Stay Stay safe and alone, or risk everything for connection. The question isn't whether you'll face these moments. It's whether you'll have the courage to choose love when it appears in the most unexpected packaging. What will you choose? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. This is Cedar Drama, reminding you that every ending is just a new beginning waiting to be written. Until next time, keep believing in unexpected miracles.